Welcome to MMO Graveyard, a new series in which we'll take a look back at the large past of previous MMOs and discover how they were successful, why they died off, what new innovations they brought to the MMORPG genre, the pinnacle of their successes, and their last living moments. Today we're going to be talking about one of the greatest fantasy MMORPGs to ever be released, Rift. Rift was definitely one of the more big MMORPG games with a budget of around $70 million and a development process of roughly around 6 years. While the budget wasn't on the same level as, for example, Star Wars The Old Republic, which had a $200 million budget, or Elder Scrolls Online, which also had a $200 million budget, $70 million is still a lot of money and puts Rift somewhere near the top of the spectrum when it comes to MMORPG development costs. For those that don't know, Rift was Trion World's first major game project and paved the way for future games like the Defiance MMO and ArcAge. Rift was also originally going to be launched under the name Heroes of Telera, but eventually went on to be renamed as Rift Plains of Telera, and then eventually just Rift prior to release. The company which created Rift, Trion Worlds, was founded by Lars Butler, previously serving as Vice President for Global Online at major American video game publisher EA, and John Van Canegam, previously serving as Executive Producer at the South Korean online video game company NCSoft. The two left their respective jobs to pursue the founding of a company that, in their own words, could define a generation of interactive entertainment by fundamentally revolutionizing the way games are created, played, and distributed. Rift was seen as potentially being a game that could really challenge the market control in which the MMORPG World of Warcraft had most of the control over at the time. Rift was going to be a game focused around the concept known as rifts, which would open the game world map and spawn monsters, leaving it up to the players to defeat the monsters and seal the rifts. This idea was going to fundamentally add something new to the genre entirely, as instead of just basic quest go-to points, there would be a public-like quest scenario system in which players would have to band together. The idea was sort of like a take on the public quest system in Warhammer, but an improvement upon it and an add for more incentives for players to work together. The invading monsters from rifts, if left unchecked, would conquer large portions of the map, inflicting casualties and destroying operations in the area. We will get more into this system in the next segment of the video. Trion was going to try and push the MMORPG genre forward by adding things into their game that had not yet been seen in other games. They did not just want to make a copy and pasted version of World of Warcraft like some other companies, though the game really did end up looking and playing a lot like World of Warcraft, but a truly unique MMORPG experience within the fantasy genre that could potentially give them a large chunk of the market. The game eventually launched March 1st, 2011 after a large alpha and beta process in North America under the name Rift as a subscription-based MMORPG. Let's take a look at the game's successes. So the game contained two playable factions like a lot of MMORPGs called the Defiance and Guardians, with in total 6 race options and for the most part an average character creator, which gave players an okay amount of options to design the physical appearances of their characters with. The faction system for the most part was well done, and there was also reports that the game peaked around 1 million subscribers, which is an extremely high number for any MMORPG. I can't confirm the validity of it completely, but it's very possible that this game peaked at around this number during the first year of its lifespan, which in itself is very successful. The game also ended up with very favorable reviews with an average rating of 84, which is higher than games like, for example, WildStar or Elder Scrolls Online, and around the same rating as Star Wars The Old Republic. So a game with a peak of 1 million subscribers and an average rating of 84 means the game did better than like 99% of MMORPGs to ever launch in the history of the genre. In conclusion, Rift was indeed a very successful game in these regards if you want to take pure numbers, sales, and reviews. But what about the game itself? What made the game successful in the first place? Well, like I said before in the development segment of the video, the Rift system was praised heavily as being fun, engaging, and for offering unique content. The location of the rifts in the game were dynamic and varied in severity. There were also 6 different types of them, from death, water, life, air, fire, and earth, and the different types would oppose each other in the game world. Apart from the world events itself and from this system, which I believe was the biggest success of the game, Rift also offered dungeons and raids. Players would form groups and battle through different dungeon difficulties, with each level of the dungeon challenging players to overcome unique strategies and encounters. I believe Rift did this system fairly well, and the difficulties offered variety for different types of players looking for easy or hard content to conquer. The most unique thing that this game did outside of the Rift system was its class system, which was praised by most players in the game. The game's class system can be summed up as, thanks to Wikipedia for this as it's really hard to describe, a player chooses between 5 different callings: warrior, cleric, rogue, mage, or primalist. Each class, with the exception of Primalist, starts with an access to 8 different souls from that calling, which have trees to which they can allocate a number of points gained each level. An additional 2 souls can be purchased for every calling, bar the Primalist, which currently only possesses 6 in total. Rift soul trees have 2 levels, branches, which are the specific abilities/bonuses that the player allocates the points to, and roots, which are the soul's base abilities that are unlocked as the player allocates a certain number of points into the branches. All races may become all classes. So this is like really complicated to understand, and like if you heard me repeat that, you guys are probably like, what the hell is this guy talking about? And I'll get into that in about a second. The system would let the player customize their character to a level not seen in most other MMOs. In the simplest of peasant terms, class equals cleric, mage, rogue, or primalist, then souls would equal the subset of each class, and the role would equal a build created from 3 souls, and only those 3 souls are active. For example, as a cleric, you can make your first roll a melee build of shaman/druid/justicar, and another build for healing with sentinel/warden/defiler, and switch between melee, DPS, and healing. It all sounds very complicated, and while it kind of is, there's like over 500 to 1,000 different specs, which is like just insane, guys. But at the level of control it gives you over your playstyle is something you just don't see in most games, let alone MMORPGs, and it worked very well for the most part. The game just had so many varied combinations you can be with each class, and so many talent combinations to try out and master, and it gave a lot of replay value to the game long-term wise if you were the kind of player that enjoyed tailoring your character around a certain playstyle or experimenting with specs. In conclusion, I think Rift's biggest asset was the variety it gave the player. Not only did it have the Rift system, which offered tons of variety in itself with the different kinds of rifts and the dynamic spawning of them and types of rewards they gave, it gave the player nearly unlimited amounts of control over their character builds. On top of that, the game offered some solid PvE content in terms of raids and dungeons with a variety of difficulties, and while the raids were not up to par with some other MMORPGs out there, as the game had a bit of a weaker raiding scene, the content was still very good. The game also has something known as the Dimension system, which is the game's player housing system. The difference to other games being that you do not get a house in Rift specifically, but you get an entire dimension. This dimension area is a small instanced map of the region that exists in the actual game, and there are quite a few different dimensions in the game to pick from, which means a lot of different areas and scenery in combination with a lot of different customizable options. It's not so much the system itself that I praise, as it's really not that amazing. It's the fact that the game has player housing in general, which is nice to see in any MMORPG. There are also guild dimensions to boot, so a nice place for you and your guildies to hang out if you want to, and makes me wonder why if smaller MMORPGs like Rift can implement these kind of systems like player housing and guild housing, why can't bigger MMORPGs like World of Warcraft do them? The system is kinda limited a bit unless you put actual money into it, but it's an interesting concept of being able to have your own unique area in the game. The game also offered some forms of PvP as well. Again, like in many previous videos that I made, the only real comparison I can give is to other MMORPGs in the market like World of Warcraft. Think of a battleground instance type area and queue system. This game, however, lacked an arena system, but at least you can invade enemy cities of the other faction in this game in world PvP, so the game at least had world PvP, which is better than nothing. I don't put the other parts of PvP in this game as being a success, but we'll get more into that in the next segment of the video. In conclusion with the game's systems, you can see the game had a very unique and highly customizable class system, its own unique public quest type / random event system in the form of rifts, a player housing system, raids and dungeons with varying difficulty, and a PvP system. Basically, the game had everything an MMO player could want. However, like most MMOs, not all of these systems were perfect. There are a few other things I didn't really expand on here for the sake of time, like crafting, which tied in with the dimension system / player housing system, whatever you would like to call it. And if you were a fan of the genre, chances are, like I said, this game would contain something you would enjoy, especially if you enjoyed fantasy online MMORPGs and were looking for something new at the time. Like I said, the game didn't do everything perfect though, so let's take a look at the game's failures. So I want to make something clear. I do not think Rift failed as a game or as an MMORPG. A lot of people don't realize this about this series, but not every game covered really truly failed. Most of these games, Rift included, made substantial profits. Their player bases just tapered off fast and dwindled with time, and the question is though, why were the games unable to retain their subscription numbers and success, like for example previous MMOs like World of Warcraft? What caused players to leave ultimately, and why did they lose their subscription fees and move more towards the free-to-play market? It's really hard for me to nail down this game's biggest failures, as I believe the game did most things really well. It was an MMORPG that felt familiar, but innovated in a lot of areas. Rift's biggest problem, though, I think, was its visual style and game engine. Rift used the Gamebryo engine, an engine found in games like Fallout 3 and New Vegas, and outside of performance issues, the game just didn't look or play that great. It was definitely passable, but the look was a bit uninspiring for a game with such a great idea behind it. This also might be more of a personal preference, however, but I just feel like the game's graphics were lacking in some regards, especially for a game released in 2011, and that the engine they chose to go with, Gamebryo, the same engine that the failed Warhammer Online used and went with, is clearly a bad choice for fantasy MMOs. If Warhammer didn't confirm that fact, then this game does. I had the same complaints about Warhammer from its uninspired look and performance issues as I have for this game, and that's no coincidence, as like I said, the game uses the same exact engine. The game also had animation issues, just like Warhammer, and no anti-analyzing. In conclusion, graphically, the game just didn't look that great. In terms of gameplay, the skill bloat at launch was insane, and there was a lot of skills that did similar things, which came with players being forced to use a lot of macros to try to limit redundancy. Of course, with so many macros meant the actual amount of skills being used by the player at the time were going to be less. It's cool that the game had so many options for the players for character builds, but some of those options could have been better thought out. The PvP in the game, the matches specifically, felt tacked on and frustrating because the classes were not balanced well enough for a battleground style system. The spontaneous world PvP would have been enough for the game on its own, but the developers really tried to shape this game into offering something for everybody, which isn't always good. As from a competitive PvP standpoint, this game really failed. In fact, it's probably its biggest failure in terms of its systems. It lacked an arena-like competitive system, any form of true class balance, and felt like an afterthought that was just tacked on. For a game with so many class abilities and options for character builds, it would have been fun to put those to the test in a competitive PvP environment. However, I don't think any developer could have really balanced this game anyway, as the class system was just far too complex. I only put this as a negative because the system they did put in was for the most part really bad, so like why even put it in? The questing system alone was also very uninspired and basically a copy and paste from previous MMOs. It's not so much the system itself though, as the quests were just plain boring, a grind, and repetitive to do. They lacked any true variation and relied on a linear path of quest hubs. At least in some other MMOs that really focus on the quest system, you get some unique and interesting storylines. This could have been more personal though, as I don't have much knowledge on the Rift game world and lore, so obviously the quests aren't going to be that interesting to me. That being said, I'm not sure even if you really were into the lore of the game, if you would really enjoy the questing experience anyway, but at least the game had the Rift system along with the dungeons and raids to detract you from this. I think what it comes down to ultimately though is the game world itself was just kind of bland and in some ways uninteresting. I really blame the art style more for this and the game engine. It just didn't seem to go well with the fantasy MMORPG style, and while the game pushed for new ideas, it really looked like a copy and pasted version of World of Warcraft with its own ideas / IP added in. I know you guys could make the argument that WoW also copied from other MMOs, but look at this UI guys, look at the questing system, look at the gameplay, look at the bag system, look at the fonts the game uses. If you took somebody from the streets and got them to play the game for 30 minutes, they would feel like they were playing close to the same game. I'm not saying this is specifically bad, as WoW does a lot of these things great, but it would have been nice to see something a bit more different. In conclusion, Rift really became the game players wanting something different from World of Warcraft would go to. It grabbed the audience that previous MMORPGs like Warhammer Online failed to grab. I could go into other things like the game only really having 2 starting areas, the game moving towards the insta-queue system that WoW had with time, and with that those anti-social problems becoming associated with the game, the races being kind of bland, the character creator being pretty limiting, and so forth. I think the biggest problem though was the game was just kind of uninspiring. It offered some innovation, but it wasn't quite enough. The graphics were okay, but they weren't good. The questing system was bearable, but it lacked depth. The game offered complex class builds, but relied too much on macros. This was a game that would intimidate new players and make it hard for them to get into, but appeal towards those willing to learn the game and adjust to its new systems. If you were able to adjust to this game and look past its faults, you would probably enjoy this game more than any other MMORPG on the market. If you wanted an experience with more hand-holding, however, and were unable to look past the game's faults, you would quickly have moved on from the game very fast. Let's take a look at the future of this game. So where is the game right now? Is it still alive and is it still playable? Well, like most other MMOs, this game has moved more towards the free-to-play market. With that comes pay-to-win systems in which you can invest real-life money into in order to save time. I don't really fault the game for this though, as most MMORPGs on the market have a similar system that is really no different. There is no box fee associated with this game, so you can go download it right now if you would like to give it a try. You can find the game on Steam. It also has an expansion pack available for it and is still getting content updates even to this day, so if you do find yourself enjoying the game, there is more content to play if you were to invest time into it. Keep in mind this video was made in 2016, so if this is like 2018, Rift might not be around anymore, I don't know. I still think Rift is worth playing, and while I don't think it would be the best choice for those looking for a free-to-play MMORPG, I think it would be the best choice for players looking to get away from World of Warcraft while wanting something similar to World of Warcraft. While Rift isn't the perfect MMORPG, it definitely can be one of the most fun to play. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. In the next episode, we're going to be taking a look at vanilla World of Warcraft, as it's been requested by a lot of people in the comments. If you have any MMORPGs you would like me to cover specifically, let me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe and like this video if you would like to see more future content as well, as the more support the series gets, the more likes it gets, the more views it gets, the longer I'll be able to keep doing it. I hope plans right now are to go up to 10 episodes, and then we'll see after that point. So again, like I said, thanks for watching, and peace out.